Today we're going to look at some of the things that influenced the colonists and American government. Do keep in mind as you work through this course that the title of the course is U.S. History and Constitution. So we want to look at all the things that went into making the Constitution, and it's important to keep that in mind as you move through the class. So first and foremost, what you want to remember is that the colonists were Englishmen. They considered themselves to be Englishmen. They had the traditions of Englishmen. And so they had this idea that they were entitled to all the things that Englishmen had, right? They believed that they had the same rights as outlined in the Magna Carta, and we'll look at that in a second. So English tradition of kings and queens we're pretty familiar with, but what you might not know is that England was a constitutional monarchy, and it means that the monarchy was limited by a written document, and that written document was the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta came from King James, who was getting in a lot of debt due to wars. He was losing those wars, and he needed to raise taxes to pay for it. Of course, this was not popular with the people. And to avoid a civil war, he was forced to sign the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta is going to limit the power of the monarchy, or limit the power of the king. The Magna Carta does two things. It establishes this idea of rule of law. And what rule of law is that no one is above the written law. So no one is above the Magna Carta, including the king. So the king can't raise taxes without going to Parliament. That's also something that's going to be written into the Magna Carta. It's going to establish a due process for crime, a trial by jury of one's peers, and establishes this idea of right to property, that the king can't just come in and take your property. All of this is outlined in the Magna Carta, which the colonists, being Englishmen, were familiar with. So you need to remember that the Magna Carta is going to put limits on the king's power. It guaranteed that Englishmen had certain rights that even the king could not take away. It established Parliament, and England became a constitutional monarchy. These are all things that people living in the colonies would be familiar with. They would also be familiar with the English Bill of Rights. And the English Bill of Rights is going to outline specific things that they have the right to, such as no standing armies, free elections, freedom of speech, freedom to bear arms, no excessive bail, and cruel or unusual punishment. So again, we're going to see when the colonists break away from England, a lot of these traditions show up in the Constitution and in our own Bill of Rights. So you can see the similarities between the English Bill of Rights and the American Bill of Rights. Someone who the colonists who would have been very familiar with, especially the founding fathers, the educated, they would have been very familiar with John Locke. John Locke believed that when you're born with natural rights, and no one can take away these rights, including the government. When you're born, you have the right to life, liberty, and property, and these things can't be taken away. He also came up with the idea of the social contract, and the social contract says that people, as they start getting established, they go out in the world and they start acquiring things, right? Like you go and you buy land and you build a house or you buy a car. That's property, and you want to protect your property. So you form a government, and the government is designed to protect you and prevent other people from taking your property. That's why you form a government, right? Basically for protection, so that you can protect your property. According to John Locke, underneath the social contract theory, it is the people who elect the government. They say, we, the people, are going to elect this person to this position to help protect things. It's not through lineage, it's not through who your father is. The people are going to elect that person. So if the person doesn't do what they're supposed to do, the people can rise up and remove that person. So these two ideas, natural rights and social contract, again, because the colonists are familiar with John Locke, they're going to understand these ideas and implement them when they form their own government. They get a taste of self-government underneath the Virginia House of Burgess. Now this is before the American Revolution, because we're separated by a big ocean, right? And we don't have planes at this time, so you were going to have to go by ship, and that ship could take months. They may assign a royal governor or a king, but that might not always be the most effective. It's local government, and they're going to do that through electing officials. And the first time we see this is going to be in the Virginia House of Burgess. And it's going to be modeled after the British Parliament. And this is going to give the British, the colonists, a taste of self-government. It's in Jamestown, Virginia. Burgess just means the name of an elected representative, and they're going to go into the surrounding plantations and get a white male to be represented in this Congress. People that will serve in the Virginia House of Burgess are going to be George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry. A lot of the founding fathers are going to have their first political experience in the Virginia House of Burgess. The Mayflower Compact is another early form of government in the colonies, and again, it's going to give the colonies a sense of being a little bit independent from England. It was developed because the Mayflower got pushed off course and landed, and they were outside of the jurisdiction of where they were supposed to land. And so before they got off the boat, they wanted to establish some sort of government, some sort of understanding to avoid chaos and to avoid anarchy, since they weren't technically under the law of the king when they got off the boat. So they signed this contract, and it's going to be the first written laws of the New World. And the Mayflower Compact is going to actually be looked at when we write the U.S. Constitution after the American Revolution, so it becomes an important document. Massachusetts Bay is another area where we're going to get a taste of self-government away from the king. Again, keep in mind, we still consider ourselves to be English subjects, but we realize that there's a big ocean between us and the king, and we want to make sure that we can keep the peace and make sure everything functions properly. And in Massachusetts Bay Colony, which was, of course, filled with Puritans, they're going to do it through the church. These mill members are going to govern the rest of the society through town meetings, and they're going to not be completely democratic, right? You had to be white, male, and a member of the church. So we're not to full democracy yet. So with the colonies developing their own parliaments, their own way of governing, England's going to develop a policy called salutary neglect. And basically it's going to leave the colonies alone and let them do their thing. They're able to govern themselves. They're definitely sending stuff back to England, and it's working, right? Parliament is going to not exert a huge amount of control over the colonies during this time period because there's no need to. And that policy of leaving the colonies alone to flourish underneath their own parliaments is going to be called salutary neglect. However, salutary neglect is going to be abandoned when England gets into debt and needs to raise taxes. And that comes about what's called the French and Indian Wars in the colonies and the 7 Years' War in England. And this is where we're going to see a lot of taxes, which we'll talk about in the next lesson, develop because England needs more money and is going to start trying to exert itself and influence in these colonies that have been left alone for a good while.